Hello, everyone. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. I do not have very long. My afternoon has filled up rather quickly today, but I did want to hop on and talk to you guys a little bit about kind of a combination of stuff. Some of it was from today, some of it was from a prayer time that a friend and I had on 12/21/25, so on the 21st of this month. And I want to share part of what we received, not all of what we received. Again, you guys know me, I like to pray over stuff before I just throw it out there to you guys and make sure that God is releasing me to talk about some stuff. But I did want to share a little bit about just and also remind you guys actually of previous words of what we've talked about with all of this stuff. Because I don't know the timing on this, but God is bringing up some new stuff, and I wanted to remind you guys of some old stuff. And specifically today, I wanted to remind you guys about the stuff regarding the financial shift that is going to be coming up at some point. Again, I don't know timing. God has not revealed that to me. But I did have some stuff that he showed us in a prayer time between me and a friend that I wanted to talk to you guys about today. And also, if you're a resident in California, I wanted to throw something at you that's good to be on your radar. I'm not sure if we have anybody on here from California, but I had something really quickly that I wanted to throw out there to you guys just so that it is on your radar with stuff. So as you guys are hopping on, say, hey, let me know where you're joining from. I am going to fly through a few announcements here really quickly, and then we're going to get into kind of the meat of this word and what we got in this prayer time. And also I want to throw an article up on the screen for you guys to look at. And we are going to dive right in. But how cool is God? We've seen a lot of the words getting confirmed from the last prayer time, which is amazing. God is awesome with all of that. So I want to go through this kind of briefly, and then we're going to dive right on into stuff. So ladies, if you are interested in the champion mentorship calls, those are available to you guys. Let me throw the banner up here for a second. Hold on. So that's where you can get to stuff. I'm currently in the process of working on a brand new website. And I built the last one on my own last time, but it was a a work in progress. Let's put it that way, because I am not the most tech savvy person. So it's taken me a little bit, but the new one is in progress and will be ready to go soon. But in the meantime, you can still get to everything you need from the Patreon. So if you guys are interested, ladies, there's a little section that says memberships. If you guys are just looking for some one-on-one time, that's where you can go to get signed up for those. There's also some other really cool resources over there. In terms of, just all of the ebooks are over on Patreon. If you guys are interested, there's some really cool written devotionals. If you guys are interested in the merch on Bonfire, all of those, we've got some really cool Jesus t-shirts. Actually, let me flash that on the screen. It's been a second while we're waiting on people to hop on here. So the Bonfire t-shirts are really good quality. I've gotten several of them myself. Let me share the screen here just so that you guys can see this. So this is what they look like. There's the Jill Sharp Ministry storefront. If you guys head over to Bonfire and just type that in, it should pop up. But anyway, we've got some cool stuff. This is my personal favorite. I love the Worship Prep shirt. They're quite fun, and they've got them in all kinds of different colors. There's the Obedience is Greater Than Sacrifice shirt, the Demon Slayer shirt, the just general JSM kind of shirt. This has been one of the more popular ones, the Jesus Keep Me Sweet shirt, and they've got it in all kinds of fun colors. So if you guys like that, they've got that available. And then one of the new ones that is one of my favorites, just because I think it's hilarious. I have a very offbeat sense of humor sometimes, and so I think this is hilarious. But they've got the Do Not Feed the Pharisees shirt. That's one of the new ones. So anyway, I digress. That's available. If you guys are interested, you can head on over to Bonfire to check that stuff out. What else have we got going on? Members, we've got the membership going on behind the scenes. So once a week, I'm putting out members videos for the members, and we are walking through 2 different courses right now. The first tier is the spiritual warfare tier. The second tier, we are talking about just keeping it clean is what it's called. We're talking about keeping your spiritual house clean, so to speak. So we have been going through all of that together. And then, of course, there are the book resources that we've got available. This is the most recent release. This is a book called The Enabling Ahab Spirit, and it talks about if you have a hard time with kind of insecurity, tolerance, having a hard time setting boundaries, all of that good stuff. This might be an interesting read. It also has 2 chapters in this book that specifically talk about the Jezebel spirit. So this book talks a lot about the interactions between Ahab and Jezebel spirit. So if you guys are interested, that resource is available. There's a cute little prayer journal. This is just kind of a one-off thing, but it's got scripture is lined on the inside. So if you guys are like me and you like to record your prayers, your dreams, your revelations from the Lord, that guy is a good little Amazon snag there. This is called the Trauma, Soul Wounds, and Legal Rights Workbook. This is also an Amazon snag. This book is part book and part workbook. And so if you guys look, there's these little workbook exercises on the inside, but there's also pages in here that read just like a chapter book. This kind of helps you to identify roots behind trauma and areas where you might need healing in your personal life. So it helps to walk you through past things that might be emotional wounds that you've walked through. It talks a little bit about deliverance in this book. It even kind of helps you in some spots to tie. A lot of people are not aware that sometimes the physical symptoms that we are facing are actually tied to emotional roots in our life that we have not yet resolved. And so if there's any of that, there's not always a causation there, but sometimes there is. This book kind of helps you to identify, wait, is this physical thing that I'm going through tied to a traumatic event in my life and something that hasn't been resolved or something that got in through that? So this is an interesting read. If you guys are interested, that is an Amazon snag. And then this is the original. This is a short, quick little read. So if you guys are looking for an easy read, this was the original book, the Unmasking Leviathan book, and it talks about how the spirit of pride shows up and how it interacts in interpersonal relationships. So what's interesting about this book is a lot of times when we think about pride, we think about kind of the haughty, braggadocious, way with pride. But this book also talks about how pride can very much show up as also being the extreme shame response, kind of the shutdown response, right? Where we put walls up and where we try to keep people at arm's length. And so this is an interesting read if you guys are looking for something that's quick and it's got a lot of scripture to kind of back it up and show you guys where this comes from in the Bible. So we've got all of that. I am also working on a new book. If you guys were at the book signing, you got the sneak peek into the new book that I'm working on behind the scenes. But there is another one that is going to be coming out soon, and I am going to save telling you guys the title on that on here for a little bit later. But there is another book that is in the works behind the scenes. God dropped the title on me for this one. So I am super excited about that. And so we will get right on into this. Okay. So let me summarize a little bit about previous words that God has showed us in the past. Okay. And then we're going to dive into this part a little bit. Today, we're talking about the financial shift that is going to be coming at some point in the future. I don't know exactly when. Okay. So many months ago, I want to remind you guys about 2 different short videos that I did. The first video was a vision of a dollar bill. Okay. And this dollar bill, it was kind of, I think if I remember correctly, I'll have to go back and watch the video. Some of you guys can chime in and let me know if you remember this one. I can't remember if it was a vision or if it was a dream, but basically what happened was it was a picture, a vision, I think, or something like that I think it was a $100 bill, if I remember correctly, but it was a dollar bill. Right. And there was fire that was going through the bill, and it was going through it not vertically, but horizontally. Okay. And this dollar bill, the fire went through the bill. Okay. And it kind of paused at I would say the 50% range. And then it kind of continued and eventually it wiped out the entire dollar bill. Okay. So I wanted to remind you guys about that vision from the past. And so, I think the answer to what that represents is the eventual collapse of the dollar. We've kind of talked about that previously, but I think it's interesting that it hovered around the 50% mark. I don't know what that means. I've told you guys the vision. It could just mean that the dollar loses a lot of value and that it will hit kind of the 50% mark in terms of overall value. Or, it could mean something different, but that's kind of what the vision was. It could represent just kind of a gradual decline. I don't know, but I wanted to remind you guys guys about that, and that that's something that God has warned us will be coming in the future. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to remind you about from the past. The second thing that I wanted to remind you about from the past is another thing that I did a short video on, and it was the video that I did about the hammer hitting the United States Federal Reserve building. Okay, so it was interesting. I remember that when I was like either asleep or right after waking up, and it was a very vivid vision of there was like a building that was huge and long and had a bunch of white columns. Okay, and in this particular vision or dream, I was kind of in that waking up state. There was a gigantic hammer. And it was bigger than a hammer would normally be in real life. It was like the size of the entire building, huge hammer. And in this vision, the hammer went and it hit the United States Federal Reserve building. And when it hit that building, okay, which represents currency, all of that stuff, it's the bank for the United States, basically, right? When it hit that building, it sent a crack right down through the center of the building. And that was that particular little vision. Okay. And so I think that there's a lot that you could potentially get out of that. But I think that crack could be symbolic of the United States Federal Reserve taking a major hit, right? The hammer hitting the building and sending a crack right down through the center. Now, I think it's probably symbolic. I don't think that that's literal per se, but I do think that that is interesting. So we've had a couple winks in the past where God has talked to us about the shift in finances that will eventually come, right? And I wanted to remind you guys about previous words regarding that, okay? Now, I also wanted to briefly mention this. You guys know that I am not a channel that tends to talk about finances quite as much. We focus on everything. However, I know that there's a lot of you guys who tune in who are kind of in more plugged in and in communities that run with that kind of stuff. So I wanted to show you guys an interesting article, and maybe you guys are already aware of this. I stumbled across it for the first time, but I did want to tell you guys who are more in the crypto space about something that California has just done relatively recently that I wanted to be on your radar. So if you are in California and you are a crypto holder, listen up, because I want to show you something. Hold on. Let me share my screen. Okay, so again, this will not apply to everybody, but I think that regardless of whether or not you are in California, this is something good for all of our radars on this, because if they're trying to do this stuff there, they could try to implement this other places. Okay, but this also just shows you that this is where things are headed. We've talked about crypto being used in a big way in the future on this channel previously. We haven't brought it up in a long time, but I wanted to show you guys this. The fact that they are trying to seize this, you got to see beyond what they're actually saying, ladies and gents, right? So the fact that they are actively working on trying to seize this lets you know that it is valuable in the future. Okay, so I'm just going to throw that out there, but I wanted to show you guys this. You guys can go look this up for yourself. It's as easy as doing a Google search and you can go find this information. But what California has sneakily done recently is they passed a law, an Assembly Bill 1052, and it was signed by Governor Newsom, which brings unclaimed cryptocurrency on custodial platforms like exchanges. Okay, so that's like your Coinbase, your Kraken, all of that stuff, right? Under the state's unclaimed property law, allowing the state to take custody of what they're calling dormant crypto after 3 years in its original form, rather than automatically selling it to cash, ensuring it's held securely until the owner claims it. Okay, so what this is saying, all right, let me put this into simple terms. And if this doesn't apply, don't worry about it. I know that some people have no idea what I'm talking about right now because we don't talk about this regularly. However, I want to say this, okay? If you guys know what I'm talking about with this, okay, what this is saying is if you are holding your crypto on an exchange, okay, that after a certain time of dormancy, they're going to go and claim that cryptocurrency. Okay, now this right now that I'm aware of, this was something that just California has done, but it's something that needs to be on our radar. This is why if you guys do not have a cold wallet and you are in this arena. I would highly encourage you guys to go look into that. The ladies that I talk to in the champion calls, we talk about this kind of stuff sometimes if you guys have questions. However, it is too complicated and it's not a can of worms that I really want to get into today on all of this. But I do want to say this is why this kind of stuff is important. Okay. They are trying to pass regulation, or I don't want to call it regulation, so it's not that. They're trying to pass laws on stuff where they can go in and they can take this stuff from you after a certain period of time. And so this is why I would highly recommend getting you a cold wallet for this kind of stuff. So you can see, let me go down here. They've got a bunch of other like actual articles on this. Like you can see that there's an article here. California passes law to keep unclaimed crypto in its original form. So in other words, if it's on the exchange for, it sounds like 3 years, they are saying that they have the right to go in and to just claim it from you. So I would highly recommend you guys getting a cold wallet and kind of staying, in touch with the news on that kind of stuff, especially if you are in California. So, okay, I did not want to spend a whole lot of time on that because that's not what we primarily talk about. However, there's some of you guys who are in that space and I wanted you to be aware of what they're up to behind the scenes with stuff. Okay. So let me say hey to a few people, and then I want to tell you a little bit about what we got in this prayer time together, and then I'm going to hop off because I've got a busier afternoon lined up today. Hey, Sue, it's good to see you from Canada. Look at this, Uganda. Thanks for joining us, Evangelist Chico. Let's see, we got Samuel on here. It's good to see you. Thanks for hopping on. Is it Ishtak? Am I saying that correctly? It's good to see you. Thanks for joining over on Facebook. Okay, we're going to dive right on into this together. Okay. So part of this, I'm not going to share everything because I'm kind of praying about which bits and pieces to share with you guys. Part of this I got in a prayer time with a friend on the 21st of December. And a lot of it had to do with things that are coming down the pipeline and things that are happening actively behind the scenes right now. Specifically with regards to what the elites are up to. So if you look at our title, it says the elites and financial shifting. Okay. So we had a prayer time and got some specific stuff on this. And I wanted to read you guys the wording that we got and just kind of go into what God gave us. Okay. So in this prayer time, it started off with, I got a vision of what looked like some big scissors. And there was a big ribbon that was out in front of this building. And it looks like a ribbon cutting ceremony. Basically. And so I wanted to throw this up on the screen. Many of you guys are already aware of this, but I like to look stuff up just to get clarity on stuff. And so I looked up, and we looked it up during the prayer time, of what does a ribbon cutting ceremony represent in general. And so it says ribbon cutting ceremonies happen to officially launch new businesses, locations, expansions, remodels, or major projects, serving as symbolic celebrations that generate buzz, build community ties, thank supporters, and provide great marketing and media opportunities to introduce something new to the public. That part stood out to me. They are held around official openings or milestones, often orchestrated with a large ribbon and oversized scissors involving owners, local officials like chamber members, and community leaders for a memorable photo op. So then it kind of talks about different times when they do them. Grand openings, like this is kind of where my brain went, as something that I'm more familiar with, like when a new business is launched, something like that, when they're opening a new facility. New locations or expansions, when they're moving to a new building, reopenings. So it can happen after significant renovations, rebranding, or even catastrophes. That little sentence was interesting to me. Milestone anniversaries, celebrating significant years, when they're introducing a new product or service. This is one that stood out to me. Unveiling major new offerings, right? Or new chamber members, often used by the Chamber of Commerce to welcome new businesses. So here's what it means symbolically. It marks the official beginning of a new chapter. It can relate to community engagement, public relations and marketing, generating excitement, recognition, all of that stuff. So a little bit of context into that. That's kind of how the vision started off, was a vision of these big scissors and a ribbon cutting ceremony. Okay, so there was that. So then the vision kind of shifted to where it looks like little individual bank branches. And it was kind of like I just had a knowing in the vision that it represented little individual bank branches that were like local in people's towns. So it wasn't like, I don't know, it wasn't a big bank, if that makes sense. It was like all the little, felt like local community stuff going on. Okay. And in the vision, it was all white with columns. And then God was saying he said the phrase new type of bank. And we kind of had the impression that the context had to do with this currency flip. So the banking system working differently than what we're used to. Okay. So again, I don't know timing on this. I'm just telling you guys what we got. Okay. So then it kind of started talking about, like, in the midst of these visions, how the elites are incorporated in the midst of this flip and what they're doing right now. Okay. And so when I say the elites, I talk about the high up people with money and power, sometimes in politics, who are influencing a lot of these moves. Okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're only restricted to politics. Okay. All right. So that's kind of what God was talking about with all of this. So we had a vision of a guy, and I'm going to try my best to explain this to you guys. And this one guy, just for context, he was symbolic of a bunch of powerful people at the top. Okay, so it didn't represent this guy literally. He was representing this group of people that I'm calling the elites. Okay, so there's a vision of this guy, and he kind of was in this really vibrant purple outfit. Okay. And what's interesting is he was holding a cane, and it was very intricate, like the way that this cane was decorated or set up or whatever. And he was sitting in this chair, and he had this very elaborate outfit on, this purple outfit. Okay. It's kind of made me think of just a very wealthy person. And his outfit was like a suit, and it had the coattails on it. You guys know what I'm talking about. And he had like a top hat looking look to him, and he was sitting in this chair, and I'm trying to remember how to explain this based on the vision. The cane was like a power tool. All he had to do was slightly point the cane towards someone or something. And when he did that, there would be moves that were executed on his behalf. And it wasn't always good moves. People had to align with whatever this symbolic person representing the elites did. And in some cases, if they did not, it was like an understanding they would instantly be taken out. Like they had no problem, having people no longer be here anymore. Let's put it that way. Right. And so basically it kind of expanded to a vision of a chessboard. Okay. And in this, there was it was kind of the impression that this guy, the elite looking dude representing the elites, was connected to this chessboard in some type of way. Okay. And so with the chessboard, it represented those that were high up and powerful. And it was like a fight for status and money before the system flipped over. Okay. Or as the system was going to flip over. All right. Again, I don't know timing on this. This could be years out. This could be immediately. I don't know. Okay. But basically what happened was they were moving these chess pieces around the board like you would in a normal chess game. And then God told us the phrase strategic moves. And then he said the phrase they're preparing. And he clarified that statement. He said the banks and the people behind them. Okay. And so I think this represents literal bankers. Okay. But also he was talking about that this represents some of these high up elite people, okay, that are actually controlling the shots and a lot of this stuff with all of this, okay? So that's what they were doing. They were moving pieces around this chessboard, trying to be strategic. But what's interesting is they were trying to throw each other off course in the midst of all of this. I thought that was very, very interesting. So he said throwing each other off course was the phrase that he said with all of this. And then he said competition during the preparation / transition. Okay. So it's like they were in competition with each other. And it's interesting because like they would, in some cases, appear friendly to each other's faces, but I knew that it was like they were trying to throw each other off course at the same time with stuff. It was a competition back and forth with those who were in the know about things. Okay. So then he said the phrase trying to checkmate each other. Okay. Now, if you guys are familiar with the game of chess, I am not super familiar. I grew up playing checkers a little bit, and I kind of know some of the basics on chess, but I'm not a chess person. So you guys can probably elaborate more in the comments if you know more than I do. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you say checkmate right as you're about to win the game and the queen is involved somehow. Am I correct on that? If you guys can provide a better description in the comments, that would be helpful. But anyway, he said the phrase, they're trying to checkmate each other. And I got the impression that it was like they were trying to corner each other or one up each other in the midst of this. And so one of them would move in a certain position with their little chess piece, right? And then another person would move in a certain place to try to block them, if that makes sense. And so they were doing like these specific moves. Okay, let's see what Barbara says. Barbara says checkmate is the end when the king can't move. Okay, there you go. I appreciate that, Barbara. So it was one of those impressions where they were trying to, well, it's kind of what Barbara just said, actually. They were trying to make it where the other person was stuck and they couldn't move, right? They were trying to block each other in the midst of all of this. So that's what the phrase that God said. He said, trying to checkmate each other. And then he said this phrase. I thought this was interesting. He gave a vision of the chessboard again. Okay. And then he said, the queen is Jezebel, represents the Jezebel spirit. Okay. And I knew that that was the primary functioning spirit behind a lot of this stuff that was going on. Okay. And so that obviously the Jezebel spirit represents control and manipulation. Okay. So he was showing that's the motive behind a lot of these people when they are moving these chess pieces around, is control and manipulation. And that spirit, they thought they were calling the shots themselves, but this spirit was actually an operation behind a lot of these people that were making these major decisions and these major moves. And it was the Jezebel spirit that was influencing a lot of this stuff, control and manipulation. Okay. So then it, actually, I think I already explained this, but I'm going to read it to make sure that I don't miss anything. The vision of the man in the all purple outfit with the coattails, the ornate cane, he would tell people to do something. And then there was not being here anymore as consequences for not obeying them. Remember, he was symbolic of all the higher up people in this. Okay. And then he said the word elites, and then he said the phrase, they control the moves. Now, obviously, God is more in control than they are, right? But it was from their perspective, right? You know, in this. So then he said the phrase unrighteous power. So he was talking about these people who have been controlling stuff, them being in positions of unrighteous power. Okay. And then this was an interesting phrase to me. He said it's a secret who's in control. And so I kind of got the impression that a lot of the front facing people that we see, it's not that they are not powerful. Okay. But he was saying that there's some people who they purposely keep hidden behind the scenes who are calling a lot of the moves and a lot of the shots on this stuff. Right. So that was something that was very interesting to me. I wouldn't have thought that in my natural mind. Then he said the phrase cat and mouse. And we had to go look this up in the prayer time, and I'm going to look it up again because I don't know how to describe this to you. What does the phrase cat and mouse mean? Okay. I'm going to share my screen on this with you guys. Okay. This is apparently what the phrase cat and mouse means. It means a series of cunning maneuvers designed to thwart an opponent. So that makes sense based on what he was showing us kind of with the chessboard concept, right? Cunning maneuvers trying to thwart somebody, right? Throw them off track. So he was talking about that. And then he said the phrase throwing them under the bus. And I got a vision of Bill Clinton, and it was almost the impression of when they are no longer useful to furthering the agenda, they will throw certain people under the bus in order to protect themselves. It was that kind of a concept that was coming up with the midst of this. And so I thought that was very interesting. And that's referencing a lot of the elites or the higher up people who are behind all of this. Okay. So then he said the phrase useful to the system, when not, they're thrown out. Okay. So that's kind of the cutthroat nature of this that God was emphasizing with a lot of these elites and control and power and all of that stuff behind the scenes. Okay. Then he said the phrase tit for tat. Okay. I want to look that one up too. So sharing again, una momento. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Yes. Okay. Here's what apparently tit for tat means. It means the infliction of an injury or insult in return for one that has suffered. So that's kind of like, as long as you work for me, you know, in my system and you're benefiting me, then you can stay around. But the moment that you harm me or the moment that you come against me, it's a tit for tat thing. You know, I will hurt you if you hurt me kind of a concept, you know? So anyway, that phrase came up of tit for tat. There's been a lot more of that, Barbara, recently in my prayer times. God's been talking to me. I haven't gotten as many, like, I would call them more Rhema words in the past, but he's been doing a lot more of that with me. Interesting, kind of combining that with the dreams and visions. So yeah, I would agree with that. He's doing a lot more of that right now with me and my friend who prays with me in my prayer time. So then he said the phrase renewed posturing. Okay. That was something that came up, renewed posturing. So when you posture, you position yourself a certain way. So I thought that was interesting that he was saying renewed posturing. So maybe that means that they're positioning themselves differently or afresh or anew right now. Then he said the phrase, it's a setup. I thought that was interesting. I don't know fully what that means yet, but he said it's a setup. Then he used the phrase dicey conditions, unexpected twists and turns. And then I loved this. I got so pumped at this. Are you guys ready for this? He said the phrase throwing them off course, throwing them off course. And it was God throwing these people off course, like him stepping in and him throwing them off course with whatever their plans were. I was like, Jesus, I love that. That is so cool. Right. Okay. Then he said, we have more phrases coming up here. I'm just going to read it to you guys as God said it to us. Unfortunate consequences, trapped and caught in their tracks. And then I had a vision at this point of like a spotlight that was coming down on the evil people. And you guys know that spotlights are commonly used in like plays or different stuff like that when they want to highlight a certain character or person. A lot of times it'll be dark around the person that the spotlight is on. So I thought that was interesting that there was like a spotlight that was being shown on the evil people. And it's like, you can't hide now kind of a concept, you know? So this is a season where I think we're going to start seeing a lot more exposure come up as this stuff starts to flip over. So then he said the phrase territorial turf wars, a wrestle. So that's what's going on behind the scenes right now. There's a lot of territorial turf wars, and that has to do with the chess kind of a game that God was showing. So I thought that was very interesting. Then he said the phrase a wrestle and panic. So like the elites getting panicked. Okay. And then he said the phrase slipping through their fingers. And so I was like, that's really cool. So how many of you guys know the enemy plans, but God has the final say? Amen. So I thought that was really neat. There's other parts of this that I don't want to share yet. I'm still really trying to pray about when to get this stuff out to you guys, but God was reminding us that there is a shaking that is coming. And I still want that to be on you guys' radar. He was bringing that up again. Let me see if there's other parts. I'm skipping a big part of this. Something else that he told us in the previous live that he was kind of bringing up the concept of again. We had a vision of these people that are symbolic of the elites. And by that, I mean people who are rich and powerful, but also people who are very high up politically. And he gave us a vision of basically they were in this big room. It was all men in this vision, not to say that there aren't women that are involved. I'm sure there are women that were involved, but it was all men in this vision. And they were in this room, and it was it reminded me of like a room that you might see at a casino or something, like a VIP room or something. And it had a bunch of like card table set up, that kind of stuff. And the men were all sitting around like these high up elite people. Okay. And they were smoking cigars with each other and just having conversation back and forth in this like really elite looking room. And there were like people that were standing at the ready or waiting to just attend to their every need in this room. So you could tell that it was people that probably had a lot of status. Right. And so they were, going back and forth, and it's like they were delighting in making schemes and plans. And I could tell that they had zero concern for like whether or not people would be in harm's way. It was all about their power, their control, what they would get out of stuff financially. It was that kind of a concept that was coming through. And I think some of this represented world leaders. So it was like a room of that kind of stuff. And basically they were, I don't want to say all of this. How do I say this, Jesus, where I don't give all of this away? Basically, they were delighting the idea of war again because of financial gain and all of this stuff. And they didn't care about the harm that was going to come to people because of it. And so that's a reoccurring theme that God keeps bringing up. I did want to say a couple of other phrases that we got in that prayer time was the phrase beginning of birth pains. That came up in the prayer time. Then God said the phrase, my bride is victorious. So that should be exciting and encouraging to us because the bride represents the bride of Christ or the church, right? So God said my bride is victorious. And this is interesting. This is kind of a one-off thing, but then he brought up the phrase earthquakes in diverse places. Earthquakes in diverse places. And if you guys know, that's actually scripture from the Bible. But he was bringing that up as something to watch for in the days ahead. So an increase of earthquakes in diverse places. And yeah, the elites were gleeful about war. He had us write down that phrase. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, yeah. Then he said the phrase, this is a warning for us in the body of Christ. He said, don't get caught in the undertow. Okay. And I want to tell you guys, most of you guys are probably familiar what that is, but I was going to pull it up here. So, because it's going to apply with context that I'll tell you guys in a second. Okay. So undertow is a current of water below the surface and moving in a different direction from any surface current. Okay. So it's caused by waves pushing the water ashore. It's the water flowing back out, often felt as a pull under your feet, as a wave breaks. It's a universal short distance return flow, different from a dangerous localized rip current that pulls you offshore. Figuratively, it means an underlying feeling or force opposing the apparent surface. Okay. So a little bit of context on that. Let me stop sharing that for a second. Okay. So he said the phrase, don't get caught in the undertow. And then he said the phrase, dragged under by the cares of this world. Okay. So then right after that, to provide context to what he meant, he said, sight fixed on me and unwavering. Okay, so that's our job in the midst of a lot of these shakings and coming events that will be coming at some point. Again, I have no idea the timing on a lot of this, but he was saying don't get caught in the undertow. So when events and different things start coming in the world and we start seeing an uptick in activity with a lot of this stuff, he's going sight fixed on me. Don't get caught up in the undertow. Don't let the cares of this world drag you out to sea, quote unquote, right? And come in the form of a distraction or something that throws you off course in your walk with God. Keep your sight and your gaze fixed on the Lord. And that's going to be very, very important with this season that we are headed into. So all of that to say, I want to summarize, and then I'm sorry, I've got to hop off a little bit earlier today and make this a shorter one with you guys. Events that are coming down the pipeline, I don't know at what point, right? The vision of the dollar bill, right, that we've talked about previously, where it burned horizontally in half at that 50% level, and then it burned all the rest of the way through eventually. Okay. At some point in the future, we have talked about this new beast system that's going to be coming in, okay, where they're going to start working everyone towards one world currency. Will it happen all at once? I don't know. It could be a progression into that, or we could see a major switchover that happens within a relatively short period of time. I do think that the dollar being devalued and eventually going away is a part of that, right? That's something that would have to happen in order for this to flip over, probably, as a big part of the shifting into that. And we know that they are trying to bring things very digital right now. If you guys look at what different nations are doing with digital ID, I will say I'm going to plug that as a prayer plug. If you guys can be praying about that for your individual country and just in general, there's a strong push that the enemy camp is trying to, put towards that right now. And I think eventually we're going to go there. But just be praying that I don't know, be praying for God's will and be praying for wisdom and discernment for us as we switch into that. The reason I say that is in the previous word, we talked a lot about AI in a negative connotation. I actually have another word on AI. I've got to get out to you guys soon. But it was, if you guys remember, flip back to our last prayer time where we talked about a lot of this stuff. It was a vision of, I'll have to pull it up to remember again, but basically it was like AI automatically transcribing conversations or different things that were happening. And there was going to need to be wisdom with navigating that in the days ahead, kind of a thing, that nothing would be private anymore, which honestly, I think that we've already headed into some of that, but it was like a next level. And it was going to come with a lot more control and stuff, right? I think that the reason why it's so important to be praying for wisdom as we navigate through this and to be praying against that stuff from happening before God's timing eventually is going to happen, because, you know, Book of Revelation talks about we will eventually head into one world government, not one world. Well, we're going to head into more of a one world currency. Let me put it that way for now, right? And if you guys remember, to refresh your memory, Mark of the Beast is going to be a thing where you cannot buy or sell without it, right? So things are going to be working towards that more digital route as we go from this point forward, okay? But we can push back on things from happening before God's timing if we're praying for his will. And we can pray for discernment as we go with stuff, right? Because there might need to be a point where we are really using wisdom and seeking God directly for wisdom on I would say specifically the technology piece of how do we navigate this? What do we need to have? What do we need to get rid of? What conversations do we need to have privately? That kind of stuff. I do think that that's going to be a thing where we need to stay in step with God on this stuff. I want to remind you guys about that vision that God gave me a while back. I've talked about it several times. The little kiddo that was standing on top of dad's feet, you know, parents, how they'll have like the little kid stand on the parents' feet and they'll grab the kiddo's hands and they'll like walk with the kid standing on top of the parents' hands or whatever. That it was a vision of that a while back, and it represented staying in step with Jesus. Don't get ahead of him, don't get behind him, just stay in step, right? And part of what God talked about with that is that he was going to give us next direction as this stuff becomes more intense down the pipeline on what to do and how to move and how to navigate these things as they come up. But our job is just to stay in step with him, right? And if we stay plugged in and keep him first, he's going to make sure that we're filled in at the right times, right? Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, then all of these things shall be added unto you, right? So that's very, very important. We got to keep seeking him first on all of that. And I'm curious to see what the major hit's going to be to the United States Federal Reserve, because remember, the hammer hit it and it cracked right down the center, which indicates like a major blow of some sort. And so I'll be very curious to see what that symbolized. I'm sure it will be made very apparent in days and months ahead. But anyway, I just wanted to share that little snippet. We're getting a lot more than this in the prayer times, but I'm trying to be cautious and pray about stuff when we get it coming out. But I did feel a little bit more of just an uptick with wanting to remind you of previous things that we've talked about, and also to let you know that God is on the move. And even though here's the cool part, even though they are making these moves and they're trying to do stuff behind the scene, the primary thing I want you guys to remember out of all of this that I thought was awesome is God said, hold on, let me find it. God said the phrase throwing them off course, that he was throwing them off course. God's got the final say right in the midst of all of this. So man plans, including us a lot of the time, but God has the final say on stuff. And so they're trying to do all of these different moves with different things, but God is the one who is ultimately in control. So also wanted to remind you guys about previous things. I'm going to do this as a little plug before we hop off. Hey, Charity. I'm sorry, we're hopping off in just a second, but it was good to see you. You can catch the replay if you want. The other thing that I wanted to remind you guys of was the Black Swan event dream. I'm going to keep occasionally reminding you guys of previous words because we've had a lot of stuff. But in the Black Swan event dream, if you guys remember, we were driving through the snow and kind of some dicey conditions, which is interesting that God brought up that phrase again recently in a prayer time. But basically, we were driving all on this set route to get to this like playhouse, right? Where there was like a set play that represented, kind of the way that we've done things over and over again. And everyone had this play memorized. And it reminded me of like the initial credits in the My Fair Lady movie where they like introduce an individual character and then it scrolls across the screen. They used to do that in some of the more older films that they had out there, right? Which are not all that old, but compared to where we are currently, right? So it's like this play, there's a big auditorium full of people, right? They were, introducing all of these different characters. And then all of a sudden there was like an interruption that happened. And there was a person in the midst of this who went to go, she had like a walkie-talkie in the dream, and they told her to go and arrest this person who had tried to cause a Black Swan event. And so she went and arrested the person. They were hauled off or whatever. And then everything changed, right? Like it was the understanding in this dream that life, the way that we had lived it up until that point before this event, everything was going to change after that. It was one of those just knowings and understandings. And so the play stopped. It was like a knowing in the dream that the play could no longer continue. And the lights came up in the dream after all of this happened or whatever. And basically, there tried to be mass chaos and we had to get that under control in the dream before it tried to break out. Anyway, if you guys are interested, go back and look at that. It's one of the shorter, I think it is. Charity, am I right? I know you've been on here forever. I think it's one of the shorter YouTube videos. It may have been a live that we did. Do you remember that, Charity? Anyway, it is in the video archives. And I don't know the timing on that. God has not told me that, but it does continue to come up occasionally where God's like, remind them on this, remind them of the Black Swan event. So I don't know if that's one part of the shaking. I don't know if that is the shaking, with a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, but these are things that God has warned us are coming, in the future. Yeah. So it's available. All of these, I think I actually did shorter videos on the dollar collapse, devaluation and collapse, United States Federal Reserve one, and on the Black Swan event. So if you guys are interested, you can go back and check that out. Also, there's a short video on the New Madrid fault and what God warned us about with that. I'm trying to think if there's any other things that are significant. The other one that's been kind of on my radar again and popping up was the purple bus dream. You guys remember that? So where there could have been potential, well, we were in a lockdown. That's what I can say with confidence. In that particular dream, we were in some sort of a lockdown. And there were buses that were being corralled that were purchased by the city that were sent to collect people. And I had kind of an uneasy feeling. That one's also in the shorter videos. But this is Jill talking, not Jesus. All I know from that particular dream, that was a dream. All I know from that one is that we were in some sort of a mass lockdown situation in particular areas. I think it could potentially represent a martial law type situation, but that is Jill talking, not Jesus. I don't want to add to or take away from the visions or dreams that he's showing us on stuff. So I think that's about it. I apologize. I got to hop off a little bit more quickly today because I've got obligations this afternoon and stuff that I am working on. But that's a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. They are prepping for this new financial system, and God was giving us a little bit of insight into what the elites are up to. And so we need to pray that their plans would be thwarted and spoiled that are not in alignment with God's will. And just continue to pray for God's intervention throughout this whole transition. And again, as a reminder, because we had a few more people hop on than were here at the beginning. If you live in California and you are into crypto stuff in any way, shape, or form, okay, check out the beginning of this video because we talked about how they now have a 3-year dormancy kind of a thing that they have passed, where if your crypto is held on an exchange and if it is dormant for 3 years, they can go and claim your crypto from you. Okay. This is why you need to have a cold wallet, ladies and gents. So just we talked about that a little bit more at the beginning of the live, but for those of you guys who are hopping on at the end, that is yet another thing I would like to be on your radar. And if it affects California, they could try to do this stuff in other places. So we need to be praying against this. Okay. All right. Okay. I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll chat with you again soon. Bye.